Criminal Law Act 1977. Section 6. Violence for securing entry. 1. Subject to the following provisions of this section, any person who, without lawful authority, uses or threatens violence for the purpose of securing entry into any premises for himself or for any other person is guilty of an offense, provided that a. There is someone present on those premises at the time who is opposed to the entry which the violence is intended to secure, and b. The person using or threatening the violence knows that that is the case. 2. The fact that a person has any interest in or right to possession or occupation of any premises shall not for the purposes of subsection 1, above constitute lawful authority for the use or threat of violence by him or anyone else for the purpose of securing his entry into those premises. 3. In any proceedings for an offense under this section it shall be a defense for the accused to prove a. That at the time of the alleged offense he or any other person on whose behalf he was acting was a displaced residential occupier of the premises in question, or b. That part of the premises in question constitutes premises of which he or any other person on whose behalf he was acting was a displaced residential occupier and that the part of the premises to which he was seeking to secure entry constitutes an access of which he or, as the case may be, that other person is also a displaced residential occupier. 4. It is immaterial for the purposes of this section a. Whether the violence in question is directed against the person or against property, and b. Whether the entry which the violence is intended to secure is for the purpose of acquiring possession of the premises in question or for any other purpose. 5. A person guilty of an offense under this section shall be liable on summary conviction to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 6 months or to a fine not exceeding £1,000 or to both. 6. A constable in uniform may arrest without warrant anyone who is, or whom he, with reasonable cause, suspects to be, guilty of an offense under this section. 7. Section 12 below contains provisions which apply for determining when any person is to be regarded for the purposes of this part of this Act as a displaced residential occupier of any premises or of any access to any premises. Section 12, Supplementary Provisions. 1. In this part of this Act. A. Premises means any building, any part of a building under separate occupation, any land ancillary to a building, the site comprising any building or buildings together with any land ancillary thereto, and, for the purposes only of sections 10 and 11 above, any other place, and b. Access means, in relation to any premises, any part of any site or building within which those premises are situated which constitutes an ordinary means of access to those premises, whether or not that is its sole or primary use. 2. References in this section to a building shall apply also to any structure other than a movable one, and to any movable structure, vehicle, or vessel designed or adapted for use for residential purposes, and for the purposes of subsection 1, above. A. Part of a building is under separate occupation if anyone is in occupation or entitled to occupation of that part as distinct from the whole, and b. Land is ancillary to a building if it is adjacent to it and used, or intended for use, in connection with the occupation of that building or any part of it. 3. Subject to subsection 4, below, any person who was occupying any premises as a residence immediately before being excluded from occupation by anyone who entered those premises, or any access to those premises, as a trespasser is a displaced residential occupier of the premises for the purposes of this part of this Act so long as he continues to be excluded from occupation of the premises by the original trespasser or by any subsequent trespasser. 4. A person who was himself occupying the premises in question as a trespasser immediately before being excluded from occupation shall not by virtue of subsection 3, above be a displaced residential occupier of the premises for the purposes of this part of this Act. 5. A person who by virtue of subsection 3, above is a displaced residential occupier of any premises shall be regarded for the purposes of this part of this Act as a displaced residential occupier also of any access to those premises. 6. anyone who enters or is on or in occupation of any premises by virtue of a. Any title derived from a trespasser, or b. Any license or consent given by a trespasser or by a person deriving title from a trespasser, shall himself be treated as a trespasser for the purposes of this part of this Act, without prejudice to whether or not he would be a trespasser apart from this provision, and references in this part of this Act to a person's entering or being on or occupying any premises as a trespasser shall be construed accordingly. 7. Anyone who is on any premises as a trespasser shall not cease to be a trespasser for the purposes of this part of this Act by virtue of being allowed time to leave the premises, nor shall anyone cease to be a displaced residential occupier of any premises by virtue of any such allowance of time to a trespasser. 8. No rule of law ousting the jurisdiction of magistrates' courts to try offences where a dispute of title to property is involved shall preclude magistrates' courts from trying offences under this part of this Act.